I spent most of January this year traveling over to the UK, seeing people and places. I had a great time. My main travel camera for stills on this trip was my Sony A7CR. I made a review of that a few weeks ago, which you can see if you click on this link up here. In this video, I want to share my lens choices for this trip, and if I'd make any changes if I was to do the same trip again. And at the end, I'll touch on the tripods and filters I used too, and one other camera that I took along that I didn't use much at all. Now, the A7CR packs an amazing 61 megapixel sensor in a compact rangefinder style body that's almost as small as the Sony A6700. You do lose some ergonomics with the A7CR, you lose a few buttons, you have a smaller grip, and you have no joypad on the back. But in return, you get something that's super compact, relatively light, and importantly for me, very discreet. Discreet enough that it can pass for a point and shoot camera, meaning you can appear as a total tourist and not attract any attention from passers-by or security staff. This is probably the only situation I ever come across where looking and acting like a total tourist is actually a good thing. Now, the small, light, discreet look of a Sony A7CR photographer is completely ruined if I then stick a G Master zoom lens on it. This gives me, and you, that's the whole point of this, fantastic flexibility. I can pack small and light lenses for general tourist stuff and travel, and the GM zoom if I want it for any landscape or portrait work. So here are the lenses I took and what I use them for. So I'm going to start with the G 20mm prime lens. Between this and the 40mm prime, I take most of my pictures with the A7CR. It's small, it's light, I can pass off as a compact camera. Yet this lens has really good optics, a relatively fast aperture at 2.8. It also comes with a lens hood that is reversible, so it's very easy to just store it on the lens like that. Walking the streets of London, York, Manchester, Harrogate, going through the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square, going through York Minster, going through Westminster Abbey. This lens was on my camera most of the time when I did those things, and it performed flawlessly. Second lens is the Sony G 40mm. Now, this lens I use for street and general walking around photography. It gives me a wider field of view than a 50mm does, but not quite that wide angle look of a 28 or 24. 40mm is a bit of a strange focal length, but only really because it's not traditional. That's all. We're all used to 50mm, 35, 28 for decades of film and digital photography. But I found that I liked the look of the 40mm, which is why I got this one for my A7C, and now it's on my A7CR. It's wider than that traditional, what the eye see 50mm, yet isn't wide enough to look like a true wide-angle lens. Now, the 40 and the 24mm G lenses we just talked about are part of a trio of lenses that Sony launched around the same time as the original A7C was launched. The fact they all look similar probably helped the marketing too, hence why not buy all three? But the real appeal of having them is they all have exactly the same body size, they all have the same filter thread, and they can all swap the different hoods between them too. By the way, if you've reached this point in the video and you're enjoying it, please do consider giving it a thumbs up by hitting the like button down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, because this is pretty much what I do, then why not subscribe to the channel too? My next lens is the Sony Zeiss 55mm f1.8. I have used this extensively for portraits for many, many years. It's fast, it's sharp, it has excellent optics. Now that I've got the GM lenses, it doesn't get used as much, but it's still an outstanding portrait lens, and it tends to be the one I take if I'm traveling and think I might do some portraits. Now on this trip, I thought I'd be doing that. I was expected to take lots of stage photographs of friends and family on this trip, but in the end, I didn't take any. Not because I didn't see them, I just wasn't inclined to pull out a camera at the same time. Next on the list was the Sony 28-60 zoom. Now, this is often called a kit lens, and as soon as you hear kit lens, you go, oh, that means it's not very good. That doesn't really do it credit. But I appreciate often people say the same thing. They say it's a kit lens, but it's really good. This is a kit lens, but it's really good. However, it's not very fast, and I frequently found the 28mm limiting. I also had occasions where I started out with this lens, say in the National Gallery in London, and then had to sit down, pull out the 24mm f2.8 and swap the lens over. Despite that, the following day, I would head out again with a 28-60 on the A7CR. And the problem with it really is it allowed me to be lazy. I didn't have to think about what focal length I was going to need that day. So I actually think, although I like this lens, next time I'll be braver and I will leave it behind, which will perhaps encourage me to think a bit more about what I'm going to do during the course of that day. Okay, the next lens is a bit different. It's my G Master 16-35 f2.8. Now, I can't hold this one up because I'm filming on it right now. This is the lens I typically use to film YouTube videos. Compared to the other videos I took with me, this is a complete beast. It's bulky, it's heavy, It's a very large, valuable lens. I expected, though, to use it the least. I specifically took it so I could do landscape photographs in some of the locations I was going to. And I planned for the days I was going to carry it. And this was when I was hiking on the south coast of England, or also up in the fells in Lakeland, up in the northwest of England. I didn't carry it around cities, and I didn't carry it around urban places either, because I knew I wouldn't be using it in those situations. Now, I have the Mark I version of this lens, which is larger and heavier than the more recently issued Mark II. I was actually really excited about the Mark II. It's like 10%, 20% lighter and smaller, or maybe the other way around. So I had a look on eBay to see how much my Mark I lens would go for, and I was really shocked. I might, if I'm lucky, get $1,000 for it. A lens that I paid $2,300 for less than 3 years ago. And honestly, I am not going to trade this lens in and lose more than 50% of the value just so I can get something that's 10 or 20% lighter and smaller, or maybe the other way around. It's just not worth it. Now, all of this weighed quite a bit. Even though I had a lot of small lenses, I had quite a few lenses here. I packed it all into the Peak Design 6-liter sling and also a Tenba bring your own bag camera insert. These are designed to turn any backpack, sling, or bag into a secure camera bag, and I like using them a lot. Although I don't typically use it inside a backpack, I generally tend to use it to transport things like lenses and maybe bodies from one place to another safely for travel. Don't actually use it day to day, but anyway, they're really cool. I'll put a link in below to where you can get them from. The Peak Design 6-liter sling, I use that every day when I travel. I can get the A7CR with a lens on it, with another lens, a prime, a spare battery for it, and the entire bag of the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 Creator Combo Kit. Video I'll put up here. So I can get an awful lot into that sling, and even though all that is in there, it doesn't actually weigh that much. And the other great thing about having a small sling, kind of forces you to travel small and light, whether you like it or not. So what would I do differently? Having done this trip, having really taken stock of what I used, how much I used it for, and how much I didn't use it, what would I do differently? Well, I definitely missed a fast wide-angle lens for much of the indoor photography that I was doing. You can't use a tripod in many places such as churches, museums, and art galleries. And you can't use strobes either. So I was very limited to handheld images with no strobes. Now, to offset the lack of a fast aperture, I had to pump up the ISO and rely on the IBIS to get what I wanted. Now, that works, but it's not a perfect solution and relied too much on the IBIS and ISO than I would have liked, particularly the faster ISO. I'm still pumping out the ISO to levels I don't really like to have to go to. I'd rather have a faster prime to be able to compensate for the low light. Because of this, next time I go, I'm not going to leave my 24mm GM f1.4 behind. I'm going to take it with me. And I'm going to expect to have that as the main lens on the A7CR for most situations. This does mean I should not also take the 24mm 2.8G lens that I took last time. Now, the lens that I didn't use at all was that Zeiss 55mm. I know I could have used it a lot more for street photography, but it just felt too narrow for what I was wanting to do, so I didn't think of it for that. I didn't take any portraits of the people I was seeing. I didn't have any lights with me, and I wasn't going to spend precious time setting up natural light portraits. So next time, I'm going to leave the 55mm behind. So if I take out the Zeiss 55mm and the G24mm, and then add back in the 24mm GM, I'm almost like for like when it comes to weight, and the size may be a bit reduced because it's one lens instead of two, but I'm probably stretching that a little bit. So next time, this is the photography kit that I'm going to use when I next go on a trip like this one. Firstly, the Sony A7CR. Obviously, it's a perfect travel camera. Nothing else to say really. The Sony 4mm G prime lens for general use, the Sony 24mm f1.4 GM for indoor and nighttime use, the Sony 16-35 f2.8 GM for landscapes, and that's it. That overall is lighter than what I took with me last month. It's 2 lenses less, so it's actually going to be easier to pack, carry, and just as importantly, easier to make decisions before heading out each morning. Now, what are the other essentials that I travel with in this camera kit? Firstly, a spare Sony battery. And I mean a Sony one as well, not a third-party one. I generally, for these bodies, don't use third-party batteries. But if I'm going to spend $3,000 on a camera, if I've ever got a battery problem, then I'd rather just have one company to go to and not have to fight between a battery supplier and a camera supplier. If it's a Sony battery and a Sony body, it's all Sony. So for the sake of that, I'm going to stick with Sony batteries. Next is my Manfrotto Be-Free carbon tripod. This is almost 10 years old. It is hands down the most frequently used tripod that I've ever owned. It's light, packs out small, it's easy to use, and it's super reliable. Fully extended, it's probably too much to rely on it for long exposure shots in terms of stability with a full frame camera on it, even one as small as the A7CR, although it's more the lens that is going to be critical than the body when you're talking about a body like this one. But with the thinnest legs retracted, I'm happy to use it for long exposures with no issues at all. It just limits my height a little bit that I can go to. Next is my Polar Pro variable ND filter. Now this isn't really what I like to use for photography, but I find its flexibility is really good, and it was the only one I took with me, so I use it for some long exposures of the ocean. Nothing too long, just up to a second, but it did help me get what I wanted in that situation. Other than that, I think we're getting to the end of this now. I have my Peak Design wrist straps, which clip on very, very easily. So I have the Peak Design toggles, and which always goes on much more easily when you're not trying to do it on a camera. There we go. So that's gone on there. So that's good to go. And I trust that completely. I've used black rapid straps before that attach to the tripod, and I've had Canon 5D Mark IIIs and 24-70s bounce across the sidewalk because that came loose at some point. And I obviously should have checked it every 10 minutes and not every 15 minutes like I was doing. And it came off. And anyway, the camera and the lens survived because that's a very robust system, but a lot of dents and scratches all over it. But anyway, so I do trust the Peak Design system. It's never let me down. I also do take a neck strap, and there are two different widths of neck strap. I'll put a link in below to the one that I have, but that really is also very useful. And when I'm out and about hiking, I tend to throw the neck strap on me, throw it over my shoulder, and then the camera is just perfectly safe sitting on my hip, really behind me. There's another camera I took with me that I would normally use, but having got the A7CR, I found I didn't get it out of my bag once. And that's my Ricoh GR3. I generally keep it with me when I'm traveling. It's so easy to pack away. It's easy to throw in the bag for the day. It doesn't weigh anything and it takes up no space. It has a super fast lens, which is extremely sharp, and an APS-C sized sensor. It doesn't have any zoom. It has no 4K video, just the lens, the sensor, and a very clear screen on the back to back it all up. This was the first serious trip that I've done since buying the A7CR, and I found I was enjoying using that Sony so much I didn't reach for the Ricoh at all. I've taken thousands of images with this camera over the years, and I'm not going to sell it. There are many times when this compact camera will still be my camera of choice, but if I'm packing the A7CR, the Ricoh might as well stay at home. So this really has become my travel camera of choice. I am so glad I bought it, and I'm so glad I was using it on this particular trip, and I cannot wait to travel again so I can take it with me once more. I knew the images would be good coming out of this. I knew it would handle better than the original A7C. I don't think I expected to realize just how much I would love using this camera as I did. I found myself keeping this camera on me in situations where normally I just leave the camera behind and rely on my cell phone only. It just got me back to enjoying taking images in as many situations as possible. So I hope this is useful. I hope this gave you some idea about what you should do if you are traveling with an A7CR. I'd love to hear what you think about either this camera or the lenses that I've chosen, or the selection of lenses that I've chosen for this video. My name is Julian. If I can run with it, bike with it, hike with it, or film with it, I'll put videos about it here on YouTube. If that's something that interests you, please do hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to give a like to this video since you clearly stayed to the very end. It helps the channel immensely. As always, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.